Fresh out of early access and granted full release status, Vail has entered the chat as a multiplayer VR FPS that claims to deliver unparalleled combat. I don't know about you guys, but unparalleled combat sounds pretty ambitious to me. If you haven't played Vail before, yes, you're in the right place, and if you have, stick around anyway. You're about to see this game reviewed in a way you haven't seen VR games reviewed before. As usual, I'm breaking this game down into 6 categories. Each category will be put under a microscope and scored individually out of 6. Keep in mind these scores are based on expectations for VR in 2024. This game is new and receives regular updates as of this video. Check recent update notes to make sure you're looking at this information through the right optics, and stick around because the overall score towards the end is less nitpicky and more about the actual experience. And with that out of the way, it's time to pick this game apart and see what makes combat unparalleled, and I can't think of a better place to start than with the mechanics. Let's get progression out of the way because the approach is pretty standard in this genre. You gain XP from kills and matches and unlock weapons as you level up. If you use these unlocked weapons enough, you get access to unlockable skins that show just how much you really like a particular gun. Nothing unique there, but the gunplay, that's another story. The guns in this game feel really good to use as they should in an FPS. Different weapons have different chambering and reloading mechanics. It's always a treat when the developer adds attention to detail like this. Speaking of detail, it's nice that you can leverage your weapons on surfaces for added stability. Some games flat out don't have this, and they should because it makes aiming large guns so much easier. That said, guns and combat will take some getting used to in this game, mainly because physical movement feels really slow here. At least compared to similar VR FPS titles, the matches themselves are average length when compared to a match in a game like Pavlov or Alvo. The developers are aware movement feels sluggish because they have added some pretty interesting ways of getting around the map, which in some cases feel unparalleled. These platforms and launch pads are very good at giving away your position though, so be careful. And while we're on the topic of giving away your position, these red highlighted outlines feel a little too handholdy. You can turn this setting up in the options, making it pretty easy to spot players across the map, but you can't make yourself less visible to other players, so forget being stealthy. Other than that, you'll find yourself grabbing the wrong stuff from your body slots in and out of matches a lot. Half the time if I'm reaching for chalk, I'm grabbing not chalk by accident. These chalkboards are pretty cool and more on that later, but this category gets a 4 out of 6. While combat in this game is definitely fun, I wouldn't call it unparalleled. Another thing that isn't unparalleled here is the theme. To be fair, it's implied that only combat is unparalleled, so I'll give them a pass on this one, but the theme itself really isn't different from similar FPS games. First you load into a lobby, then you indiscriminately unalive your enemies, and maybe, if you actually know what you're doing, you complete the objective before the game ends. The last one is harder than you think. I may have cost my team a few matches because I wasn't paying attention, but I won't sweat the details if they won't. Matches aside, this game has no real story behind it. At least that's what I initially thought. I did some digging and found that there is an actual story. Leave a comment below on your guess as to where I found it. While you're down there, feel free to hit the like button. We'll check your answer later. That said, this category gets a 3 out of 6 because you forgot to hit the subscribe button while you were down there. Oh, and the theme doesn't feel out of place here. There's no emphasis on story, but in a game like this, the story isn't usually what you show up for anyway. You show up for the one thing we all chase on that never-ending road to the Sword Art Online experience, which, let's face it, would never actually happen because no government would be stupid enough to let that be legal. Yeah, so Immersion. Vail has one of the most immersive pre-game lobbies I've ever seen in VR. The lobby is one massive space that lets you interact with everyone. You can draw on these cool chalkboards and it genuinely feels like you're playing alongside middle schoolers because you are. A lot of middle schoolers play this game, so you can expect all of the shenanigans that come with that to feel very immersive. Otherwise, in that same lobby, you have this large screen that shows you how good or bad you did in the previous match, and another one that lets you immersively vote on the next map or game mode. Seriously, this is really well done from an immersion standpoint. Unfortunately, the immersion stops and starts in the lobby. I mentioned earlier that movement feels sluggish, and it hurts this category. You can't jump unless you use something on the map or you're on a level that specifically allows it. It's one of those minor details that hurts immersion more than expected. The bad news is that immersion gets a 3 out of 6. The good news is the pregame lobby was cool enough to bring the score up a bit, which is great because the game itself doesn't do much to make you feel like you're actually in this world. Speaking of which, your eyes probably won't help you with that, so let's talk about the visual quality. There's no way around the fact that the visuals in this game are on the lower end of the magazine, and that's with graphics settings cranked to max on PC. The textures on all non-gun and non-player surfaces look rough, and this footage looks better than the actual game does inside the headset. Other than that, I noticed some optimization problems. More times than not, when starting the game, the screen spazzed out. It's a little noticeable here, but much worse in VR and will definitely make you sick if your stomach is on the weaker side. It sucks because I was only able to fix this by restarting the game, and that didn't always fix it the first time. For reference, you can always check the video description to see what setup I have for a given review, but for this one I'm using virtual desktop with the Meta Quest 3. The Quest 3 is pretty much my go-to headset as a baseline for these games, so if you have a better headset, assuming you don't run into any other problems, maybe the overall quality will be better. That said, I'm going to gloss over the insane amount of advertisements in this game. Imagine a company paying a developer to insert ads into random surfaces of a game. This is that game. At least these ads are related to the game though. All this to say, visual quality crawls away with a 2 out of 6. The awesome look of the guns and avatars carry this category, but the baggage is just too heavy. And with visual quality out of the way, let's move on to motion aids. And the TLDR is that the settings you think should be here are here. One thing I really appreciate is the ability to turn off joystick-based turning. Joystick turning should always be included because it really does help reduce motion sickness, but you should always be able to turn it off completely, and the devs got that right here. Another appreciated motion aid here is the default settings for grabbing stuff. Very few VR games don't have the option to switch this up, but this is another setting that a surprising amount of games choose toggle for as default instead of hold. The less immersive option as default in a VR game is a head scratcher, but again, I digress. Height calibration in this game is pretty cool. It's done in the settings, and I can only assume it's done automatically on game launch since I found this setting by accident, but they have this cool 3D image of your avatar that pops up whenever you calibrate. This is a pretty unique way to approach calibration, but it's well done. Motion aids gets a 4 out of 6 because it does a lot right. There are a few thorns on the rose, like the earlier mentioned stomach churning screen twitch, and the unavoidable stomach churn you get when using launch pads. Motion aids can only do so much to keep you figuratively grounded, but the motion aids perform well here. On the topic of things that do well, the audio quality is also pretty good. It won't blow your mind, but it beat expectations I had going into this game. As usual, game volume will be turned up a bit for this section. One thing you might want to be wary of is the audible children I mentioned earlier in this video. I personally have nothing against playing games like this with middle schoolers as long as they're actually allowed to play. I know it can be a turnoff though for many gamers, so you should know that they can get pretty loud. Otherwise, the sounds made by weapons in this game are pretty good. Guns have those crispy reloading sounds we all love, and the sound of impacting bullets are kind of therapeutic. The grenades sound alright, but the knives sound good, especially when you throw them. Audio quality gets a 4 out of 6 because the soundscape for this game is pretty good. With all 6 nitpicky categories out of the way, it's time to look at Vail from a try to enjoy it perspective. When I play games like this for the first time, the game description is my baseline for expectations. That said, unparalleled combat just isn't something I experienced here. Vail is fun in the way most VR FPS games are. The gunplay is fun and engaging, but the game doesn't feel very deep because there really isn't anything below the surface. For the most part, what you see is what you get. There is a comfort learning curve because of movement, but it's pretty fun once you get comfortable with the controls. The most memorable highlights for me are the guns and the innovative pregame lobby. That's assuming you exclude the advertisements. All this to say, Vail walks away with an overall score of 3 out of 6. It's definitely not the worst new VR game you'll play, but in a word, empty. It feels empty. I enjoyed the experience, but I wouldn't be able to tell that this game was Vail if you reskinned it and changed the sounds. This is a game that could heavily benefit from integrated mod support. With all that said, thank you so much for watching. New reviews coming your way every week, and yes, these games come at a personal cost, but I'd happily trade that cost for your entertainment. Like and subscribe because I'd hate for you to miss out on future content, and until next time, stay immersed.